Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that smells like smoke and seal fat, where the wind sings through the cracks in wooden walls and the night is far longer than the day. You stir beneath a fur blanket that still carries the faint scent of wet sheep, and the air around your nose feels sharp enough to cut. Your breath rises in little clouds above your face. Winter has come to the Viking world, and not gently. Outside your longhouse, the landscape lies buried under snow that squeaks dryly beneath boots. The sky is a deep inkpot of stars, cold and silent, and your toes are already regretting being attached to your body. There's no central heating, no fleece pajamas, no electric blanket humming sweetly under your sheets. Just you, your kin, the hearth, and the bone-deep determination not to freeze. You probably wouldn't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how far this little firelight reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hear it before you feel it hush of snow against the roof, and then the low groan of wind against the wall planks. The dark season has arrived. In Viking lands, winter doesn't just show up, it moves in, spreading its icy cloak over fjord and farm, freezing the rivers and turning pastures into white stillness. It's not just cold, it's weeks of deep, sunless grey, followed by months of blackness where dawn never seems to come. The Norse had a word for this kind of darkness, skammedeikth, short days. It was more than just a season. It was a slow, creeping shadow that tested your soul, your bones, and your firewood pile. This morning, you wake with a stiff neck and straw in your hair. The longhouse is still, except for the muffled snores of your cousin and the twitching of the family dog at your feet. The only light comes from the banked hearth in the centre of the room, a lazy, glowing red beneath a thick bed of ash. Your job now, as the one who woke first, is simple: don't let the fire die. Because if it does, there's no handy click to turn it back on. So you shuffle to the hearth in wool socks, which are slightly damp from yesterday's snowmelt, and gently stir the ashes. Beneath the grey powder, coals glow like sleepy dragon eyes. You breathe on them, coaxing life. One spark. So, a flicker of flame. You add a twist of birch bark and a few sticks of pine, and just like that, the longhouse exhales warmth. This fire isn't just comfort, it's life. Not only does it heat your food and brew your ale, but it warms your water, drives away damp, and keeps frostbite from nibbling on your extremities during the night. Most importantly, it gives your small family something to gather around, a nucleus of warmth in an otherwise unforgiving world. Viking homes went draft-proof masterpieces. The longhouses were often constructed from timber, turf, and stone, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof if you were lucky. If not, the smoke lingered inside like an unwanted guest, clinging to your hair, your tunic, your bedsheets. On the plus side, historians still argue whether this constant smoke helped preserve the wooden rafters or slowly poisoned everyone inside. Take your pick. But there's something deeply comforting about it, too. That smell of wood smoke and cooked oats becomes the scent of home. It settles into the beams, the beds, even your skin. As you tend the fire, you glance toward the wooden shutter. A pale blue light seeps through its cracks. Outside, the snow is deep enough to swallow a boot. The chickens are quiet, huddled together in the corner where someone stuffed a bit of straw for them. The cows haven't mooed all morning, which might mean they're conserving heat or plotting. Winter starts earlier than you'd like and ends later than you remember. In some parts of Viking Scandinavia, snow could fall as early as October and stick around until May. For nearly half the year, you lived with ice on your eyelashes and breath that turned solid. Yet somehow, the Norse adapted. You did not rage against the cold. You respected it, anticipated it, prepared for it. Summer wasn't just for harvesting barley and raiding monasteries, it was for gathering what would get you through the long, frozen silence. Every piece of wood chopped, every skein of wool spun, every fish dried and strung under the eaves had one goal: make it through the dark. There's a rhythm to Viking winters that doesn't feel rushed. The days blend into each other. You learn to measure time not by hours, but by tasks. By the time I've twisted enough wool for a tunic, it'll be time for salted fish. Or, when the stew starts to bubble, Cousin Eric will be home from digging out the goat pen again. Still, winter carries its own magic. You've heard tales of ice so clear you could see the bones of a frog frozen in a puddle. The snowflakes drifting silently into your cup of mead. Of the northern lights green and violet snakes across the sky that sometimes whispered if you stood still long enough. And on nights like this, when the wind howls like a hungry god and you're safe indoors, there's a strange peace in knowing you've built enough warmth to survive. Tomorrow, the roof might sag. Or the river might crack under its own weight. Or someone will forget to close the barn door and you'll have a frostbitten sheep again. But tonight, the fire is lit. Your hands are warm. The shutters are drawn. And you, dear listener, are exactly where you need to be. You stay curled beside the hearth a little longer, listening to the quiet breathing of those still wrapped in woolen blankets behind you. In the Viking longhouse, warmth doesn't come from just one fire, it comes from the way a whole room bends its life around it. The hearth is the soul of the house. Not just metaphorically. Literally. Every waking moment of the cold season rotates around it. You don't stray far from it unless absolutely necessary. The deeper winter settles, the smaller your world becomes, a few paces between fire, bed, and food. It might surprise you to know that most Viking homes had only one fire. Just one central hearth, usually a rectangle of flat stones with glowing coals nestled inside, right in the middle of the longhouse. There's no chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof. And while the warmth spreads gently through the open space, it's the firekeeper's duty to ensure it never goes out. Not once. Because lighting it again, in a world without matches, means hauling flint and steel and praying for dry kindling. You move carefully now, adding larger logs to the fire. They hiss, releasing the scent of spruce and old sap. The smoke curls up and around the rafters, warming the air and tinting the house with that perpetual smoky perfume. You can almost taste it, it's in the bread, the bedsheets, even your hair. When the wind picks up outside, the fire pops with a sudden spark. You don't flinch. You've lived with this rhythm too long. The walls of the longhouse do their best to hold the warmth in. Made of overlapping planks or stacked turf blocks, they insulate against the worst of the wind. Still, you keep your fingers near the flames when you can. The fire never gets hot enough to roast you, only enough to keep your knees from stiffening and your fingers from freezing while you spin wool or carve spoons. There's always someone near the hearth. Always. In the mornings, it's you and your cousin muttering over ash and porridge. In the afternoons, your grandmother, knitting and humming. And in the long, long nights, your father, who's not really asleep, just staring at the flames like they're whispering something only he can hear. Evenings bring everyone together. The fire becomes a gathering, place not for idle chatter, but for quiet mending, shared meals, and the occasional soft song. Someone sharpens a blade. Someone else patches a hole in a tunic. Children trace stories in the soot on the floor. No matter what's happening, the fire is always at the center. It flickers in every eye, colors every moment. It's not just a heat source. It's a signal of life. You crouch to place another log and glance at the charred ring of iron that hangs over the coals, the cooking tripod. A blackened pot sways gently from its hook, filled with last night's barley stew. Still warm. Still safe. The pot rarely gets emptied, it's topped off daily, bits added in, bones fished out, more turnips dropped in than anyone wants to admit. But that stew, that bubbling, unpretentious cauldron, becomes a kind of companion during the winter months. If you ever want to test a visitor's bravery, just lift the lid after a few weeks and ask if they want some. Historians still argue whether Viking hearths served ceremonial functions beyond the practical. Some suggest that offerings were made into the fire's more tokens for gods or ancestors. Others believe the hearth spirit itself, a quiet presence of the home, needed respect and silence. There are no written manuals, of course, just fragments of belief tucked into sagas and folk memory, like ash hidden in wool. Occasionally, someone will toss in a bit of fragrant herb juniper, if you're lucky, or maybe dried rowan berries. Not for any sacred reason, necessarily. Just to change the air, to offer the room a scent that isn't wet goat or soggy sock. You shift on the bench, feeling the warmth on your side and the chill on your back. That's the Viking experience in a nutshell, one side of you baking, the other still frozen. and you just accept it. For a while, you drift into that firelit trance. You watch the glow flicker in the iron pot. You stare at the soot-darkened beams above you. You listen to the low snores of your brother and the quiet creak of snow sliding off the roof. Time softens. You aren't waiting for spring. You're just here. Present. Warm enough. Alive. In some sagas, warmth is a kind of magic. There are tales of men surviving nights in the mountains with only their cloaks and a brave heart. And then there's the story of the warrior who built a fire so hot it melted the snow all the way down to the grass, just by cursing at it hard enough. Don't ask me how reliable that one is, but you can't deny, fire feels like sorcery when the world around you is made of ice. Of course, there are dangers too. Fires can smoke too thickly. Sparks can jump. You remember the tale of a neighbouring farm that woke to a glowing roof beam, set smouldering by a wayward ember. They beat it out with a snow-soaked sheepskin and lost half their winter blankets in the process. So, yes, fire is precious that it must be respected. You never sleep with your back too close. You never let the toddlers near the kindling pile. And you never, ever fall asleep without someone watching the flame. That's why the oldest ones in the family often take the night shift. Not because they're the weakest, but because they know how to listen for the fire. They know its moods, its breath. They can tell when a coal needs a nudge, or when a wet log is about to smoke out the whole room. And you're learning. You stretch your legs and tuck the fur tighter around your waist. Your fingers are warm now. Your cheeks glow. And as the longmouth stirs behind you, you realize the fire has done more than heat the room it's brought another morning. Another day survived. Another night that didn't win. You rise slowly, the fire's warmth lingering on your skin like a farewell kiss, but the moment your feet hit the packed earth floor, the cold reminds you who's in charge. It snakes up your legs with the sharpness of old nettle, and you mutter something impolite under your breath, something your grandmother probably muttered in the same tone. Decades ago. Time doesn't pass quickly here. It just circles, like the smoke above the hearth. So before anyone sees you shiver like a leaf, you grab your cloak, a thick, woolen thing dyed with onion skins into a golden brown, and pull it tight over your shoulders. The fabric is scratchy, heavy, and slightly damp at the hem. Still, it's a treasure. A shield against the creeping cold. Because here, in the frozen north, what you wear is as important as what you eat. Your underclothes are linen, woven in warmer months and saved from too much wear. Over those go wool trousers, socks tied with leather strips, a tunic laid twice, and finally a fur-lined cloak. You don't dress for style. You dress like a cabbage. Layer after layer. Each one essential. And every stitch made by someone who thought deeply about how cold your knees might get. The Vikings were clever about clothing. You might think of them as rugged warriors stomping about bare-chested in snowstorms, but no one who's ever spent a night in a Norse winter would be that foolish. Instead, they wore tunics of thick wool, often woven tightly enough to resist wind and dampness. The best ones were made from vadmal, a densely felted wool that was practically armor against the cold. It wasn't soft. It wasn't fancy. But it worked. Fur, of course, was the crown jewel. Seal fur, fox fur, and if you were very lucky or slightly illegal, bear fur. You might drape a strip around your collar or line the insides of your boots. Rabbit fur made for the warmest mittens, especially when stitched inside out so the fuzz faced your skin. Historians still argue whether fur was a mark of wealth or simply a necessity. But one thing is clear, no one survived the night in just one layer. You wrap a woolen scarf around your neck. It's stiff from last night's steam, but smells faintly of the lavender someone tucked into the storage chest for luck. Your hat a lumpy, ear-flapped thing goes on next, covering your hair and most of your dignity. And don't forget your feet. They're the first to complain. You slip into felted socks, tuck them inside fur-lined shoes stitched from ox hide, and bind the ankles with strips of leather. It's not elegant, but again no one cares how you look when the river freezes hard enough to crack an oar. By now, others in the longhouse are stirring. There's always that brief, shared moment where everyone looks like a bundled loaf of bread. Cloaks over shoulders, hoods barely above blinking eyes, hands tucked under arms. a symphony of sighs and sniffles. You look down at the youngest one, still wrapped in a too-big tunic with sleeves dragging the floor. She's trying to tie her shoes with mittened hands. You kneel to help her, and she grins of her teeth missing, the gap as wide as a fjord. Wool was everywhere. In socks, blankets, even woven into padding for boots. You remember how your aunt once joked that if the house ever caught fire, it wouldn't burn, it would just slowly smoulder into a giant ball of yarn. And it wasn't all grey and brown. Vikings loved colour. Clothes were dyed with whatever they could gather, madder root for red, woad for blue, birch leaves for green, and, yes, onion skins for that strange yellow-orange that made you look like a cooked carrot. It wasn't always flattering, but it was cheerful. And in the deep winter, that mattered. There's a story from one of the sagas where a chieftain survives a bitter storm by stuffing his clothes with dried moss and seaweed. You're not entirely sure that's historical fact or just some drunk poet's idea of a good joke, but either way, it reminds you, Vikings did what they had to. They even used urine to soften leather. Don't think about it too hard. Just know that when your boots are supple and warm, and everyone's wondering how you managed it, you smile and say it's a family secret. And when you stepped outside into that biting wind that turned your nostrils into icicles, and your breath into steam, you knew that every layer was a lifeline. There's a dignity in that. In preparing. In surviving without drama. You didn't whine. You didn't complain about the cold. You just added another pair of socks, pulled your cloak tighter, and got on with it. That's what makes the Viking winter different. It wasn't just endured. It was outwitted. One woolen layer at a time. You peer out the shutter now. A fresh dusting of snow lies across the yard. The animal pens are quiet. Someone's already cleared a path to the well with a rake. The sky is that pale, metallic grey that always looks like it might cry. You grab your mittens from the peg by the door lined, patched with old boot leather, and slide them on. They don't match. One's brown. One's darker brown. But they're warm. And as you open the door and step into the icy morning, a gust of wind tries to slip past your collar. You smile, pull your cloak tighter, and mutter an oath at the sky. Winter's teeth may be sharp, but your layers are sharper. You step back, inside with a puff of frost on your shoulders, cheeks tingling and nose red like a winter apple. The fire still glows in the hearth, and you make your way to the sleeping nook, tugging off your outermost layers. The cold clings to your clothes like burrs, reluctant to let go. But here, under the timbered roof and smoky warmth, the body begins to soften again. Sleep, in the Viking world, is a shared endeavour. You push aside a fur curtain and ease into your family's sleeping box, a built-in bed space raised slightly off the floor, its sides enclosed in wood to trap heat like a personal little sauna, minus the steam and plus a snoring uncle. These were not beds in the modern sense. No king-sized indulgence, no feather-stuffed duvets or embroidered linens. Just a heap of straw stuffed into linen sacks, a few woven wool blankets, and, if you were lucky, a piece of tanned hide to drape over the coldest corner. There's no privacy here. You nestle shoulder to shoulder, with kin, wrapped together in a kind of sleepy bundle of elbows and whispered dreams. Little ones tuck in between grown-ups, not just for comfort, but for warmth. Occasionally, a chicken finds its way in. Shouldn't be surprised. Warm feet are warm feet. You shift to avoid a sharp straw stalk poking through the linen, adjusting your blanket. It's heavy and smells faintly of lanolin and smoke. You feel a small body curl up behind your younger cousin, who doesn't speak much but always steals the warmest patch. You let her. There's no better insulation than body heat, and no one knew this better than the Vikings. Sleeping together wasn't odd or awkward. It was practical. Intimate. Humour. Historians still debate whether sleeping spaces were strictly divided, parents in one, children in another, servants elsewhere, but the sagas hint at the blurred lines of a winter night, when survival mattered more than structure. If the house was full, you found a place to lie down, even if it meant curling on a bench, tucking under a table, or falling asleep with your feet near the hearth. And when the storm howled outside, rattling shutters and hurling ice at the roof like angry runes, that enclosed sleeping box became a kind of womb. A world within a world. The wooden panels soaked up the fire's warmth during the day and slowly released it back at night, like an old friend remembering your needs. Of course, it wasn't always peaceful. Someone would snore. Someone else would kick. And now and then, Uncle John would wake up convinced he'd swallowed a spider and insist on spitting into a cup until dawn. Still, there was a rhythm to it. You learned to breathe with the house, to let the sound of the wind lull you, to accept that sleep came not in perfect silence, but in shared breath and creaking beams. Some nights, the cold slipped in anyway. You'd feel it first at the tip of your nose, then creeping across your shoulders. On those nights, someone would whisper a lullaby or hum a quiet, tuney tune. Your grandmother sang, and her grandmother before her. The kind of song that makes you think of green hills and warm sun, even when your toes are icy little stones. You shift now, settling your head on the pillow, which is actually a burlap sack stuffed with wool scraps and maybe a forgotten spoon. Not exactly soft, but it does the job. You pull the blanket higher, up to your chin, and exhale into the fur's edge. Your breath makes a little cave of warmth. You nestle in. It wasn't uncommon, on the coldest nights, for people to sleep in shifts, especially if there were animals to tend, fires to stoke, or strange noises outside that might be wolves or just overly enthusiastic snow. One ear was always half awake, listening for creaks that didn't belong to the house or for the telltale shuffle of someone needing help. That's why older folk often slept closest to the fire, not just because they needed the warmth, but because they could be trusted to wake when the wind changed. In wealthier homes, there might be separate sleeping compartments, divided by curtains or wooden partitions. But in the average longhouse, you slept where there was space, and that space was a shared one. It taught patience. And, quite possibly, empathy. Hard to stay angry at someone you snore beside every night. You knew their dreams, their sleep mutterings, the exact angle of their nightly elbow jab. And in the dark months, when the sun rose late and barely lifted above the horizon before sinking again, sleep stretched long and soft across the day. There were no alarms, no strict hours. You rose with the fire, slept when it dimmed. Your body followed the rhythms of the cold slow, quiet, deliberate. Sometimes your dreams took you elsewhere, to bright fields, to distant lands across the sea, to summer boats and laughing meadows. But more often, they stayed here, in this house, with this family. The dream would change, but the fire was always burning. The blanket always warm. In one old story, there's a line about how the gods grant sleepers protection against the long night. You always liked that. As if sleep itself were a kind of cloak, a gift to wrap around your soul while the cold tries to creep in. And if you ever woke in the middle of the night to find someone had tucked an extra fur around your shoulders or slipped their warmer feet against yours without a word, you didn't speak of it. You just let the quiet gratitude settle in your chest. Now, as you drift under the blanket, you feel the house settle too. A groan in the timber. A flicker from the hearth. A rooster clucking in its sleep. And your last thought before sleep takes you is this: how remarkable it is that in such a bitter world, people still found ways to keep each other warm. The rooster doesn't crow not this early. Not in winter, but you hear it shift and mutter in its dreams. Maybe it, too, is dreaming of spring. You're already awake again. Blinking into the flickering firelight, the blanket pushed halfway down your shoulder, one arm still tucked under your cousin's head like a lumpy pillow. She drooled on your sleeve again. Of course she did. You wriggle out gently and sit up in the low gloom. Your breath clouds the air as you rub your arms. It's not freezing, but it's close. The fire needs tending, and someone needs to check the animals. Pulling on your cloak and wrapping a scarf around your mouth, you slip toward the heavy wooden door. When you lift the latch and ease it open, the cold meets you with a sharp slap like walking into a snowdrift made of tiny needles. You hiss quietly through your teeth, but step outside anyway, boots crunching against the packed snow. The barn is only a few paces away, but that walk feels longer when your lashes start freezing together. Still, you're not going just to feed animals this morning. You're going to visit your roommates, because in the Viking winter, you don't just live with family, you live with the livestock too. As you slide open the barn door, a warm, damp blast of animal breath greets you. The scent is thick, hay, dung, wet fur, and warmth. Yes, warmth. Because cows, pigs, goats, they generate heat. A lot of it. And in the biting heart of winter, every degree counts. Many Viking homes, especially in rural farms, were longhouses with animals living right under the same roof. Separated by a low wall or simple planks, the animals occupied one end of the structure while the humans lived at the other. There was no polite distance. You shared warmth, space, and the occasional cough. Some called this practical. Others, smelly. Either way, it was genius. You step into the straw-strewn enclosure and greet your roommates, 2 goats with a grudge, a pig who snores louder than Uncle Bjorn, and a milk cow with the patience of a saint. They blink at you with sleep-fogged eyes, unconcerned that you have only half your cloak tied and hay in your hair. One of the goats sneezes dramatically, then continues chewing as if nothing happened. You get to work refreshing the straw bedding, checking for frozen water troughs, topping up the feed. Your hands are stiff with cold, even inside your mittens, and every so often, you tuck them under the cow's neck for a moment of blessed warmth. She doesn't mind. You think she understands. Keeping animals indoors in winter wasn't just about heat. It also protected them from predators, kept them from wandering off into snowdrifts, and made daily chores manageable. If you had to chase a goat through waist-deep snow every morning, you'd never get anything else done. Trust me. Historians still debate the exact structure of these human-animal households, whether every family kept their own livestock indoors or whether some longhouses served as communal warm barns. But archaeological remains suggest that many homes had flooring designed to slope slightly downward beneath the livestock, guiding waste away and keeping the living quarters from turning into a bog. Ingenious, if a little fragrant. You take a moment now to sit on an overturned bucket and breathe. The cow shifts beside you, steaming gently. The barn is quiet, aside from the soft rustle of straw and the occasional snort. The warmth here is dense, close to the ground, rising from the animals' bodies in slow, steady waves. It's not luxurious. It's not tidy. But it's real. And in this frigid world, it's survival wrapped in a woolly package. You remember last winter, when the snow collapsed the neighbour's goat shed. The poor creatures were found huddled under a pile of beams alive, barely saved only because they'd crushed their own hay pile and insulated themselves in it. After that, everyone reinforced their roofs, and let in a few more animals. Even chickens, flighty little things, were welcome indoors. Not because they were useful in winter, they barely laid eggs when the sun vanished, but because they gave off just enough heat to be useful. And because children adored them. A sleepy hen-on. Your lap made the long evenings by the fire just a little cozier. You rise now, stretch your aching knees, and give the pig a gentle pat. She grunts in response, which you decide to interpret as gratitude. Back in the longhouse, the fire has been fed again. The air still carries that low, rich smell of smoke and fur and porridge. Someone is boiling water for washing. Someone else is arguing softly over who gets the last turnip. You shed your cloak and sit by the fire, hands outstretched. One by one, the family begins to stir again. You hear the stomp of boots against the entry mat, the creak of a bench as someone sits with a sigh. The cow's low bellow echoes faintly through the wall. This is winter life. Close quarters, steamy breath, shared warmth, and the ever-present background chorus of clucking, grunting, and occasional bleating. There's a saying passed down in your village: if you don't wait to a goat stepping on your foot, it's not winter yet. And while no one would admit to loving the smell, the closeness, the shared breath of creature and cane was strangely comforting. It reminded you that you weren't alone, that something else depended on your care, that even in the bleakest night, there were warm hearts beating nearby. You pull your wool socks tighter and press your hands together, remembering the cow's gentle breath against your back. The wind howls again outside, rattling the shutters. But inside, the fire crackles, the animals shift in their stalls, and a faint, familiar barnyard smell seeps in around the door. You smile. It smells like home. You glance upward, drawn by a low creak above your head. There, hanging from the smoke-darkened beams, are the silent guardians of winteros of meat, fish, herbs, and the occasional mysterious bundle wrapped in cloth. The rafters of a Viking longhouse are not just for holding up the roof. They're a pantry, a treasure trove. A reminder that if summer is for feasting, winter is for cleverness. You stand, stretch your arms and reach up toward a long, smoked leg of lamb, its surface leathery and brown from months above the hearth. It resists for a moment, then yields with a creak of old sinew and twine. You bring it down like it's an heirloom, not dinner. Because when it's -20 outside and the snow is knee-deep, you don't go hunting. You go climbing up into the beams, into the shelves, into the cool corner of the house where the shadows linger. That's where winter food lives, waiting. Preserved. Vikings had no fridges, no freezers, but what they had was air cold enough to turn your breath solid and minds sharp enough to use it. Nature itself became the storage room. You cut a thin slice of lamb with your belt knife and chew slowly. It's salty, tough, a little smoky, but rich. You can taste the summer herbs it was rubbed with thyme, maybe even wild garlic. It's not fresh, but it's survival on a string. Preservation wasn't fancy, but it was effective. Meat was smoked in long sessions during the fall hung above the hearth where the constant smoke dried and cured it. Fish, too, especially herring, cod, and salmon. If it could be caught and dried, it ended up in the rafters. You've heard stories of dried fish so old it doubled as a hammer before it became a meal. You believe every word. But meat wasn't the only thing they preserved. You walk to the corner chest, an old, iron-bound thing that creaks like a ship hull when opened, and inside, nestled in straw, are frozen root vegetables, turnips, carrots, onions. Still hard. Still edible. Still precious. Some are shriveled. One is suspiciously soft. You leave that one alone. The cold here isn't a problem, it's a solution. Most homes had some kind of ice cellar or cold pit, a recessed spot dug into the ground or packed with snow and straw where perishables could last longer than a bad marriage. It wasn't refrigeration like you know it, but it kept the beets from turning to goo. Milk, of course, didn't last. It became cheese or skyr, a kind of tangy Viking yogurt. Butter was salted and stored in wooden tubs. Grain, threshed in autumn, was kept in sacks stacked high on shelves, sometimes dusted with ash or wrapped in birch bark to keep the rats honest. Historians still argue whether winter storage was centralized like a communal food halla handled family by family. But evidence suggests that each household had its own strategy, its own rhythm of hoarding and hiding. Some even buried meat in snow, marking it with carved sticks so they could dig it up months later. You smile, remembering the time Uncle Dawn forgot to mark the pork. It was June before that ham was seen again. It was delicious, if a little mossy. You return to the hearth and pull out the cooking pot, still warm from breakfast. There's stew inside, of course there is, and you add a handful of barley, a sliver of smoked lamb, and half a wrinkled carrot. The pot never empties. It just evolves, like a small, edible saga. Every meal leaves its echo behind. Some bits float there longer than others. You don't think too hard about them. A few herbs go in, too, dried from the summer garden and tied in little bundles, lovage, angelica, maybe a trace of mint. You crumble them in, watch them swirl. The smell that rises is familiar. It's not gourmet, but it's home. That's the magic of Viking winter food. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't arranged in towers on pottery plates, but it nourished deeply. It came with memory. The dried apple slices, picked with your sister in autumn. The smoked fish, bought by candlelight, cleaned on a dock slick with frost. The honey, a gift from a neighbor after your roof blew off. You pull a hunk of bread from a cloth near the fire. It's hard, probably dense enough to be used as a weapon. You soften it in the stew. Much better. Of course, not everything was pleasant. Viking beer could be sour. Some batches of preserved fish were borderline crimes. And you've never forgotten this experimental goat sausage your cousin tried to make with dried berries and regret. One bite nearly ended your faith in goats entirely. But despite it all, you made it through the winter because you planned like a squirrel and rationed like a monk. You knew what every bite meant. and when it got low, really low, you did what needed to be done. You tell yourself the stew doesn't taste better because it's warm, but it does. And tonight, when the wind is howling again and your belly is full of something that's part turnip, part mystery, you'll wrap yourself in wool and think, yes, we can do this. One more night. Because when food hangs above your head, when grain lies under your bench, and when butter is buried under snow like treasure, you're not afraid of winter. You've outsmarted it. The wind has settled for now, whispering against the eaves like an old friend catching its breath. You pull your cloak tighter and sit cross-legged near the fire, the stew still warming your belly, and your hands resting in your lap. Around you, the others begin to gather. Slowly, quietly, as if drawn, not just by the fire, but by something older, deeper call of a story. The skald, of course, is already in place. Is not the village's best warrior, or the strongest builder. His hands are twisted with age, his eyes slightly filmy from years spent squinting at smoke. But when he speaks, when that voice, low and scratchy as a pine branch, curls out over the hearth, all conversation fades. Even the goats seem to hush. You lean forward, elbows on knees, like everyone else. Because in a Viking winter, entertainment doesn't come from books or bards or painted stages. It comes from memory, from voice, from the art of holding a room with nothing but your breath. Tonight's tale begins with a shipwreck naturally. There's always a shipwreck. But the way he tells it, the sea is alive, jealous, lashing at the sailcloth like a woman scorned. You close your eyes and imagine it. The ice-crusted prow, the men clinging to rope, the crunch of wood snapping against rock. You know this tale. Everyone does. It's been told a dozen times. But each winter, it changes, grows funnier, stranger, or somehow sadder. That's the beauty of Viking storytelling. It's a living creature. Fed by wind, reshaped by snow, embroidered by time. Historians still argue whether skalds improvised their sagas or memorized them exactly. You think it's both. You've seen how he pauses to take a sip of ale and smirks, just before changing a detail that makes your father scowl and your aunt laugh out loud. Tonight, there's a riddle tucked inside the tailor favourite trick. He delivers it mid-story, as if the hero must solve it or be swallowed whole by a sea monster. You know better. The riddle is for you. What bites with no teeth, sings with no mouth, and sleeps in the sky? The room murmurs. Some guess wind. Others, stars. Your little cousin says Uncle Dawn, which is not wrong. He never tells the answer. Oh, yet. You're meant to chew on it through the night, roll it around like a pebble in your palm. Viking riddles weren't just gamers, they were training. Mental sharpness mattered. The cold may numb your fingers, but your mind must stay alive. The tale continues. Now there's a witch, a cursed axe, a bear that speaks in rhymes. You don't care how accurate it is. You care that it moves, that it lifts you from the hard bench and sets you sailing into stormy waters under starlight. You glance around the fire. Everyone's leaning in. Even the oldest ones, who've heard this tale since they were young enough to sit on someone's lap, are smiling softly. The story is not just entertainment. It's bondy. It weaves you together in the dark, like wool on a loom. You recall other nights, other tales of the god who drank the sea and fell asleep for 100 years, of the girl who turned into a hawk to escape marriage, of the man who sneezed so hard he invented thunder. Were they true? Of course not. Were they true enough? Absolutely. One winter, the skald lost his voice for a week, and the longhouse was so quiet at night it felt like something sacred had gone missing. It wasn't just the loss of noise, it was the absence of ritual, of comfort. Like someone had forgotten to tend the fire in the center of your soul. So when he speaks now, every word feels like a gift. When the story finally ends with the ship saved by a bear who turns into a tree, don't ask, you all exhale in one long breath. The fire has burned low. Someone stirs the coals gently. The goat sneezes again. But the skald isn't done. From beneath his cloak, he pulls a riddle board, a flat piece of wood, etched with little notches and marks. He hands it to the youngest child, who holds it like a relic, eyes wide. It's her turn. You remember when it was your hands shaking, your voice cracking as you whispered a riddle to the crowd and waited. It was terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of the sea. She gives it a try. What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows. Mountains, you think. But you don't say it. You let someone else whisper it. The guessing is the joy. Evenings like these are long, but they don't feel it. Time folds gently around the firelight, and you lose yourself in the rhythm of words, in the creak of benches, the scratch of wool on skin, the occasional giggle. Eventually, the Skald tucks his board away and says no more. That means the night is done. Not officially, but spiritually. People start drifting to their bunks. You stay a moment longer, staring at the embers, replaying the sea monster's growl in your mind. You wonder what it would be like to live inside a story forever always warm, always dramatic, always ending with applause and stew. But here, reality is enough. You rise, blanket in hand, and give the Skald a respectful nod. He doesn't return it. Is already asleep, chin on chest, snoring like a man who spent the night sailing in his own tale. And as you crawl into your sleeping nook, the question returns to you. What bites with no teeth, sings with no mouth, and sleeps in the sky? The answer comes just before you drift off the wind. You wake with a stiff back and straw in your hair again. Of course you do. Someone's elbowed you during the night, and your blanket has mysteriously migrated toward the goat at the foot of the bed. You sigh and swing your legs over the side of the sleeping box, feet landing on cold floorboards that send a jolt straight to your teeth. The fire's a quiet red glow now, tucked beneath ash like an old dog curled up in its favorite spot. You tiptoe to it, coaxing the coals with a bit of dry moss and bark. Flames flicker back to life, slow and stubborn, like they're protesting the morning as much as you are. Once the fire crackles again, you reach for the blanket draped across the bench, thick, scratchy wool, woven last summer and smelling faintly of lanolin and old smoke. You toss it around your shoulders and pull it tight. But beneath it, your hand thumps something hard and round. Your shield. You forgot it was there, tucked under the bench and half covered in an extra pelt. You chuckle softly. It's not that surprising. In a Viking household, everything has a second life. Even the tools of war. You lift the shield and run your fingers along the rim. It's round, wooden, reinforced with iron bands, and a little scorched on one edge from a near-disastrous cooking experiment last month. But more importantly, it's flat and sturdy, and when winter sets in, that makes it excellent insulation. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly used shields as beds or just stored them nearby. But practical logic and a stiff back suggest, yes, absolutely. If it kept your rear from freezing off, you used it. You lay the shield flat, toss a folded pelt over it, and there a perfectly serviceable sleeping mat. Not as comfy as a straw-stuffed mattress, but better than the raw floor. And in a crowded house with only so many nooks and benches, sometimes the shield won. You look around now, noting other oddities repurposed for comfort, a helmet used as a grain scoop, a sword scabbard holding dried herbs on task, and a bench leg reinforced with bits of antler from last winter's hunt. Nothing is wasted. Not in winter. Especially not warmth. You sit back down and pull the blanket tighter around your legs. Beside you, your cousin adjusts the blanket covering his shoulders, a patched thing made from the remains of 3 older cloaks stitched together. Each square has a story, the red piece from a long-ruined tunic, the blue one from a wedding cloak, the brown one from... You're not even sure. Maybe a tent. Doesn't matter. Together, they make a quilt of memory, heavy enough to block out the chill. Blankets were currency in a sense. Time currency. Someone spun that wool. Someone dyed it with wood or madder. Someone sat near a hearth in summer, humming a half-forgotten song, and wove each thread with care. You feel it in the weight. In wealthier homes, bedding might include imported pelts, fox, reindeer, even bear fur if you were lucky and brave. The richer the house, the deeper the pile of sleeping furs. But even in humbler dwellings, there was ingenuity. A tunic folded just right could serve as a pillow. A sled, flipped upside down, made a perfect child's cot. And your own arms wrapped around your chest were sometimes the only blanket you had left by morning. You walk now to the storage chest near the wall, the one with iron hinges and a faint scent of mould. Inside are the good blankets kept for guests, elders, or desperate nights when frost breathes down your neck and you wake covered in ice. You run your hand over them. Thick. Coarse. Reliable. They'll last generations. And there's something else in the chest, too, a rolled hide, soft on one side, crackling on the other. You unroll it and find an old sleeping rug lined with rabbit fur. Someone stitched little knots into one corner, maybe a charm, maybe just boredom. You drape it over the bench. The firelight flickers across it. It looks almost regal, in a Viking kind of way. But blankets and shields aside, nothing helps sleep more than exhaustion. Viking days were full. Wood to chop, ice to break, animals to feed, wool to spin, children to chase. Beds went for lounging. They were for collapsing, which is probably why people slept in shifts a few hours here, and nap there. Wake to stoke the fire, drift back off. No clocks, no bedtime bells, just the rhythm of necessity. You remember nights when you couldn't sleep, when the wind howled through the walls like a creature looking for a crack, when the cold settled into your chest and made your dreams strange. And what did you do? You lay your head on your shield, tucked your cloak under your chin, and hummed one of the old songs. Sleep would come. Eventually. It always did. One of the elders, in your village, an old woman with more wrinkles than bread loaves, once told you, if you can't sleep, close your eyes and lie still. The dreams will think you're ready and come find you. You believed her. Now, with your shield pushed neatly back under the bench and your blanket folded over your knees, you sip from a warm wooden cup of mead and gaze into the embers. The house is stirring again. Slowly. Someone coughs. Someone curses softly at their frozen boots. But for now, you stay put. Wrapped in layers, in memories, in wool. And if anyone asks, you're not just sitting. You're guarding your spot. With a shield. You're stirring a pot of barley near the hearth when it begins the slow, unmistakable itch in the back of your throat. Not a dramatic cough. Not yet. Just a dry tickle, like your lungs are wearing wool. You stifle it. But it returns, sharper this time. You grimace and lean away from the rising steam. Across the room, your cousin is already bundled in every blanket in this house, looking like a disgruntled cabbage. Her nose is red, her eyes are watery, and she's sipping a mug of something that smells like fermented socks and mint. Ah. Cold season has arrived. It always does. In the Viking world, winter didn't just mean cold, it meant illness, close quarters, shared air, damp wool, not enough sunlight. You didn't have to fight off raiders to feel miserable. Sometimes your worst enemy was your own sinuses. You shuffle to the shelf by the door, where your grandmother's remedy jars are stored. There's a pot of moss paste, still sticky, a bundle of dried angelica root, a pouch of something labeled "Don't sniff too hard." You grab the angelica and break off a piece, chewing slowly. It tastes like bark and old secrets. Historians still argue whether these remedies truly worked or were just traditional placebo. But when you're coughing hard enough to scare the goat, anything is worth a try. Vikings didn't have doctors in the way you think of them. They had wise women, herb masters, and that one relative who was very sure that goose fat cured everything. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they just rubbed warm butter on your chest and hoped. The most feared illnesses weren't always dramatic. A bad fever could steal someone in a day. A winter cough could settle into the lungs and refuse to leave. Frostbite, once it set in, didn't reverse. You learned to watch for it. The grey tips of fingers, the strange numbness, the quiet complaints no one wanted to admit. You remember one winter when the neighbour's boy got caught in a drift, his boots soaked through. They had to carry him home like a log. His toes never quite forgave him. After that, no one went outside without triple-checking their wrappings. You sit now beside your cousin and offer her a small cup of warm mead steeped with cloves. She takes it with a sigh and a sniff, sipping slowly. Mead wasn't just a drink, it was medicine. It soothed throats, calmed nerves, helped you forget how much your nose hurt. There's a bowl nearby filled with hot stones from the fire, dropped into water to make a kind of steam. You toss in a few herbs and let the scent fill the room. Your cousin leans over the bowl, face flushed and eyes closed, and you swear the goat looks jealous. Of course, not every cure was herbal. Some believed that rubbing ashes mixed with honey on the chest warded off bad spirits. Others swore by wolf bone powder, though no one could ever remember where to find wolf bones. Your uncle once tried to cure a cough by burying his boots in the snow and standing barefoot on a prayer stone. It didn't help, but he did claim to see the future afterward. Not everything was practical, but it was always hopeful. And in winter, hope is as important as heat. You sniffle once and reach for a cloth. Even you aren't immune. The worst was when everyone got sick at once. The fire would burn low, the stew would go cold, the house would fall into a silence broken only by coughing and muttering. Those were the hard weeks, when you counted not just how much food you had left, but how many healthy hands remained to cook it. But Vikings were resilient. When you were down, someone else picked up your work. When the herbs ran low, someone fetched more, even if it meant trudging through knee-deep snow to the hillside where the juniper grew. You never stayed sick alone. One of the oldest women in your village once said, "If you don't smell like garlic and goat milk, are you even trying to survive?" She lived to 94. You listen to her ghost often. There's a knock at the door. Your aunt enters, carrying a small basket wrapped in cloth. She lifts the edge and reveals a few wild mushrooms, some dried cranberries, and a small pouch of something pungent. It's the neighborhood's barter medicine. Each winter, families share what they have, trading dried sage for smoked herring or honey for a handful of onions. She presses the pouch into your hand. Boil it. Don't ask. You nod. Boil it. It smells like despair and root cellar, but it might just work. You pour a little into your cousin's mug. She makes a face, drinks it, and falls asleep not long after. Success. You sit back against the post, wrapping your arms around your knees. The room is quiet again. Someone stirs in the sleeping nook. Someone else is humming low, tuneless. The steam from the stone bowl curls upward, catching the light. You feel the cold settling into your bones, yes, but you also feel the fire, the blankets, the closeness. You feel the care. And tomorrow, when your cousin's cough softens and your nose stops running like a spring melt, you'll remember this, that healing in Viking winter wasn't about potions or perfect cures. It was about enduring together, one spoon of moss paste at a time. The wind quiets, just for a moment, and in the hush you hear it, the soft rhythmic click of a spindle spinning, the low hum of a woman's song, barely above a whisper. You turn toward the corner of these longhouse and see her there, your aunt, or your grandmother, or perhaps just a neighbor staying through the storm, her hands deftly twisting wool into thread by firelight. She is wrapped in a fur-lined shawl, her bare toes peeking from under a thick wool skirt, gently tapping in rhythm. A basket of raw fleece sits beside her, and from that cloud of wool, something useful and strong begins to form. This is winter's real work. Quiet. Unhurried. Endlessly patient. You draw closer, settling down onto a fur mat near her. She nods, but doesn't stop. The spindle whirls in her hand, the wool slipping between her fingers like silk, though you know it's coarse and oily, still full of lanolin. It will be washed later. For now, the important part is getting it done. In Viking households, women's work was the backbone of winter survival. While warriors might dream of axes and battles, it was thread and grain and clever hands that kept the world turning through snow. Spinning wasn't idle. It was essential. Every thread of wool became part of something else: a sock, a tunic, a sail for a boat. You can't eat thread, but you might freeze without it. Historians still argue whether spinning and weaving were done mostly in winter or year-round, but here's the truth. Winter gave you time. No ploughing, no planting, no long days at sea. Just hours day, spent indoors, and the steady patience of fingers moving through the cold. You watch now as she finishes a length of yarn and winds it into a skein. She reaches for a loom leaning against the wall, not one of the great standing looms used in the summer, but a lap loom, small and light enough to work on by firelight. The loom creaks softly, and the shuttle begins to move. Click, tap, hum. A rhythm so old it might as well be a heartbeat. Elsewhere in the house, someone is carving wood, a spoon or a peg or a spindle for the next batch of yarn, and someone else is sewing a patch into a blanket using a needle made from antler, bone, or if you're lucky, imported bronze. The thimble. A callous thumb. Vikings didn't waste winter. They turned it into a season of making. You reach for your own task now, scraping a strip of hardened leather, softening it with a bit of fat, and preparing it for boot repairs. Your hands move more slowly than hers, but there's no rush. No clock to race. Only the soft promise that, when spring comes, the boots will hold up. The shirt will fit. The sail won't tear. Everything you do now builds something for later. The women often overlooked in the sagas full of swords and shouting ruled this season. They managed the stores, planned the meals, fixed the tools, cared for the children, the sick, the stubborn. And they knew how to stretch a winter ration into something nearly festive when the mood called for it. You remember the time your mother made flackcakes with dried berries, the last of the summer's harvest, hidden away for just such a day. You were so excited, you dropped yours in the fire. She gave you half of hers without a word. They knew how to make medicine, too, not just for the body, but for the soul. A warm drink. A lullaby. A dry sock when you thought all hope was lost. Tiny acts, quietly repeated, that kept a whole house afloat. There's a saying you once heard, if winter doesn't bend you, it teaches you to weave. And as you look around, you see that weaving everywhere, not just on the loom, but in the way blankets are layered, firewood is stacked, meals are composed from scraps. It's all a kind of quiet artistry, passed from hand to hand. The woman beside you finishes her thread, bites it cleanly, and hands you the spindle. You take it, clumsy as ever, but she only smiles and leans back against the post. She hums again, and the tune curls through the smoke like a ribbon. You try your hand at spinning. Your fingers tangle, the thread breaks, and you mutter a small curse. She chuckles. Try again. And you do, because that's the heart of Viking winter life. You keep going. You learn by doing. You survive by crafting. You don't wait for the sun to return, you weave something warm while the snow falls, and when night comes, you set your tools aside. You stretch out beside the hearth, arms aching slightly, but proud. You've made something today. Not grand, not heroic, but real. And tomorrow, you'll spin more thread, sew more patches, dry more herbs. You'll carry on the quiet rhythm of winter wisdom passed down by women whose names went carved into stones but whose blankets, boots and barley stews made sure you would survive to remember them. You wake in the middle of the night to a creak in the rafters. Not loud, just one of those small, uncertain sounds that might be a shifting roof beam. Or something else. You hold still for a moment, tucked beneath your blanket, ears perked. There it is again. Another creak. Then silence. Then a thump. Light and quick. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, half dreaming. The fire is just aglow now, embers, curled like old fingers in the hearth's belly. The others are asleep, a tangle of limbs and quiet breaths, but something feels watched. And here's where your Viking brain starts to split in two. One side says, it's just the wind. The other side whispers, it's the ghosts again, because when you live in a house built of wood under a sky of frost and stars, surrounded by the bones of ancestors and the howling dark, it's hard not to believe that something else shares the night. You reach for the drinking horn hanging near the bench and tip it toward the hearth. The mead inside is warm not from the fire, but from the ginger and honey steeped into it earlier. A winter drink, strong and a little spicy, meant to keep you warm and brave. You take a sip, and your heart slows. Vikings didn't fear the dark, not exactly, but they respected it. The night was when spirits stirred, when the gods walked unseen, when the cold reached not just your skin but your soul. And so, to fight that creeping chill, they armed themselves with faith, folklore, and a healthy serving of fermented courage. Alcohol wasn't just indulgence. It was medicine, celebration, ceremony. And, on a night like this, company. Historians still debate just how potent Viking mead was. Some say it was weak as soup. Others say it could fell a reindeer. You believe both. Because sometimes you've had one cup and seen colours that didn't exist. Other nights, you've had 3 and felt nothing but a warm nose. But mead wasn't the only thing keeping spirits warm. There were gods for this. Real ones. Odin, with his long cloak and missing eye, who walked among mortals in disguise. Thor, who rattled the heavens with his hammer. Frigg, who kept the hearth and saw all futures, even the grim ones. You've carved their runes into your belt, whispered their names in your dreams, lit candles, sometimes, just in case. And then, there are the ghosts. No one talks about them directly, but everyone makes room for them. You've seen how the old ones leave a crust of bread near the fire before bed, or how someone mutters thanks aloud when the stew doesn't burn, or how the dog barks at the empty corner and then refuses to sleep near it. You've heard stories everyone hates of spirits who knock once for warning, twice for sickness, and 3 times when someone's time is near. Are they true? You don't know. But tonight, you knock once on the wall yourself. Just in case. There's a comfort in the rituals. The way the mead horn is always passed to the left. The way someone always stirs the fire 3 times before sleep. The way songs are sung softly after supper, not loudly, not boastfully, but like lullabies for the house itself. One of your favourites is the ale blessing song, half sung, half spoken. Warm the cup and guard the door, let spirits pass and gods restore. If luck be lost or night be long, let fire and horn make weak bones strong. You whisper it now, just once, before sipping again. And outside, the wind shifts, just a little. You smile. Maybe the spirits are satisfied. Or maybe the goat finally knocked over the broom again. Either way, you're still here. Still warm. Still watched over. You lay back down and pull the blanket up to your chin. The mead has spread through your chest now, a quiet, humming glow. Your heartbeat settles into a slow rhythm. You can hear your sister breathing near your feet. The baby murmurs in her sleep. You feel, suddenly, a great connection not just to the house, but to everyone who's ever slept in a house like this. Everyone who's ever sipped mead in the dark, hoping the ghost by the hearth doesn't sit too close. There's a kind of peace in it. The night is not just fear, it's memory. It's tradition. It's full of things we cannot explain and don't need to. And in the morning, when the sun still refuses to rise and the snow comes down sideways, you'll remember this, that even the darkest Viking nights had light. It came in the form of glowing embers, of warm drink, of whispered prayers, and of the unshakable belief that we do not face winter alone. It begins with a crunch beneath your boot. Not the soft sigh of snow, but something sharp as straw, freshly scattered across the icy threshold between house and yard. You smile, recognizing the trick. Someone's laid it down to keep the ice from claiming another ankle. You nod in silent thanks. That someone, probably your uncle, has learned the hard way that winter survival isn't just strength. It's strategy. You step out into the morning twilight. Though morning is generous, the sun barely peeks over the horizon these days, casting everything in silvery blue. The sky feels close, like it's pressing down with quiet weight. Snow clings to the roof, glittering in thin patches. The wind carries a sharpness that makes your eyes water. You pull your cloak tighter and begin the day's small rituals, shaking snow from the woodpile, checking the well's wooden cover for frost, making sure the goat hasn't escaped. Again she has. These are the daily defenses, not against raiders or famine, but against the slow, creeping threat of exposure. In a place where the wind could flay skin and the snow could bury fences, the village didn't survive winter by luck. It survived by cooperation. You head down the narrow path toward the neighbor's longhouse. The trail is familiar, packed hard by dozens of boots. No one walks through fresh snow if they can help it. The old paths are used, widened, reinforced with branches and straw, sometimes even ashes from the hearth. They're marked with tall wooden poles when the snow gets too deep to see your knees. You remember a year when the paths vanished in a single night. The blizzard blew through like a temper tantrum, and by morning, it was impossible to find your way even a few feet from the door. You only made it to the neighbor's house because someone tied ropes between the doors the day before. Historians still argue whether Viking communities used rope lines and markers like these regularly, but oral tales say yes, and your own frostbitten memory agrees. You've grabbed onto those ropes more than once, eyes stinging, nose useless, walking blind through a curtain of white. You arrive now at your neighbor's house, where someone's already up, breaking the ice in the water trough and tossing hay. You wave, and they wave back with a gloved hand, then nod toward a shared stack of firewood. Of course, firewood is everyone's problem. You join in, helping haul the precious logs from the community pile. Each family contributes a portion of what they chopped in summer and fall. There's no shame in taking some now. You'll return the favor when their axe hand blisters, or their child comes down with a cough. That's how the village survives, not as individuals, but as threads in the same heavy, frost-covered tapestry. It's not all solemnity and duty. There's laughter, too. Someone makes a joke about your crooked hat. You retort with something about their snow-stiff beard. Another offers you a bite of frozen cheese which tastes like salted rock and then dares you to bite it without cracking a tooth. You try anyway. Your teeth survive. Barely. You head back home with a few more logs under your arm and a little more warmth in your chest, not just from the exertion, but from the knowledge that you're not doing this alone. Along the way, you pass the old snow cellar. Just a pit, really, dug deep into the ground and covered with wooden slats and packed snow. It keeps things colder, even, than the air. Inside, you store perishables, milk, cured meat, even the last apples of autumn, now wrinkled and soft but still sweet. You remember sneaking one once as a child, biting into its half-frozen flesh and feeling like you'd stolen a slice of summer. You'd shared it with your sister, each of you chewing slowly, grinning like foxes. Back in your own longhouse, the others are up and bustling. Someone's melting snow in the big iron pot for washing. Another is mending boots by the firelight. You set down the wood and begin unpacking your own bundles, more twigs, bark, and the best part, birch curls shaved from the log just right for starting flame. They catch like nothing else. You stash them carefully. Little tricks like this make the difference. A bowl of ashes by the door to sprinkle on slippery steps. A small mirror hung on the outside wall to reflect what little sunlight there is. A chunk of lard near the door, mostly for the dogs, but on desperate days, a bite for yourself too. Winter in a Viking village isn't conquered. It's negotiated. One clever trick, one warm word, one shared pot of stew at a time. You sit near the fire, rubbing warmth back into your fingers. Your little cousin leans against you, holding a doll made of twine and scraps of cloth. It has one button eye and no arms, but she talks to it like it's a queen. You remember making one just like it years ago, when a storm trapped you indoors for 3. You built a palace for it out of firewood. You gave it a voice. You named it Snow King and blamed it for every creak and bump in the night. She names hers Wind Baby. Of course she does. You smile. Outside, the wind picks up again, and a few snowflakes dance past the window slats. Inside, the fire catches the birch curls. The stew begins to bubble. And all around you, the quiet systems of survival hum along. Hands busy, eyes alert, hearts open. Because here, in this frozen season, cleverness is currency. Kindness is armor. And togetherness, quiet, unglamorous togetherness, is what pulls you through. It arrives without warning. One moment, you're stepping outside for a bit of air, wrapping a shawl around your shoulders, thinking maybe, just maybe, the wind has softened. The next, you're clutching the door frame, snow whipping sideways into your face like 1,000 tiny blades. It's not a storm. It's the storm. The one people remember for years afterward. The one they talk about while stirring soup and shaking their heads. The one that doesn't knock on the door, but kicks it in and tracks snow across the whole house. You slam the door shut and latch it fast. The longhouse groans as a gust barrels over the roof. Bits of ice skitter down the walls. Somewhere near the eaves, something wooden gives a sharp crack, but nothing breaks. Not yet. Inside, the air changes. You can feel it away. A house breathes differently during the worst night of the year. You move fast now, grabbing extra blankets from the chest, packing rags into the cracks of the shuttered windows, checking the fire, feeding it a full log even though it's barely burned halfway through the last one. Wasteful? Maybe. But tonight isn't about efficiency. Tonight is about making it through. The cold comes in like a guest uninvited. Not loud. Not fast. Just persistent. Creeping. Settling. Someone sneezes. Someone else mutters a prayer. You toss an extra fur to your cousin and pull the little ones closer. You can feel the draft curling around your ankles. Your breath clouds in front of your nose. The fire hisses, suddenly alive and angry, like it knows what it's fighting. And then thud. The gust slams against the side of the house, hard enough to rattle the walls. Bits of snow swirl down through the smoke hole. A bowl clatters off the table. Someone curses. You hold your breath. Then, let it go. The house holds, just like it always has. This is why you spent all summer patching the thatch. Why the beams were reinforced with extra pegs. Why you saved the thickest wool for the darkest weeks. Not because you were paranoid, but because you remember. You remember the blizzard 3 winters ago that blew the west door right off its hinges. You remember digging out the chicken coop and finding only feathers. You remember the old man down the valley who didn't make it through the night because his firewood ran out. Vikings didn't fear the storm, but they respected it like a god. And gods, as you know, are hungry in winter. Historians still argue whether these storms were really as bad as the sagas claimed: walls of snow, rivers frozen solid, men turning blue with frost. But you've seen enough to know, some nights test even the best-built walls. You gather everyone near the hearth. The room shrinks, not from fear, but from necessity. You lay down blankets. You bring out the last of the salted cheese. Someone uncorks a little flask of honey mead, not for celebration, but for staying awake. Because sleep is dangerous on a night like this. Too easy to slip under, too easy to let the cold kiss your skin and steal your breath. So you sit, and you tell stories. Funny ones, loud ones, long-winded ones about that time your uncle got his foot stuck in a barrel during a snowstorm and tried to use it as a sled. The children laugh. Even the oldest one smiles a little, though his eyes never leave the shutter. You keep the laughter going. It pushes the cold back, somehow. Like warmth, made of sound. The fire spits and dances. Sparks leap upward into the dark rafters, where the meat still hangs and the roof still groans. But it holds. You pass around a cloth filled with roasted barley, warm from the pan. No one's really hungry, but chewing gives you something to do. Something human. Every so often, someone checks the walls, pokes a finger at the doorframe, listens for leaks or cracks, but the structure stands. Because you built it for this. Still, you know what's out there. Snow like knives. Wind like fists. Ice thick enough to trap a cart wheel. Trees snapping like twigs. It's not just cold. It's wild. There's a tale, of course, for nights like this, about a spirit called the Snow Mother, who walks the ridges in storms, searching for houses without light. If she finds your hearth cold, she slips in, not to harm but to make it so no one wakes, so the fire must never go out. You feed it another log, even though your stash is running low. You whisper a little, Lynn, just a habit now, for the fire, for the family, for the morning. It helps. Eventually, the worst of the storm passes. You can feel it, the way you can feel hunger or sleep. The wind still howls, but there's no anger in it. Just tired snow, falling soft. No one says anything for a while. You just breathe. Together. The fire is down to coals. Your hands smell like smoke and wool and hope. The walls are dusted white inside now, a line of powder at every seam. But everything important is dry. The house did its job. You did your job. And as you lie back, eyes closing, The storm finally still. The last thought in your mind is not fear or frost, it's gratitude. Because tonight was the coldest night of the year. And you were warm. You wake to silence. Not the unsettling kind, no creaks, no sighs, no whispering wind, but the soft, blanketing hush of a world wrapped in white. You sit up slowly, blinking at the dim light filtering through the shutter cracks. It's a little brighter today. Not by much, but enough that your eyes squint instead of strain. You peek through the slats. The world is frozen still. Snow lies deep and untouched across the yard, piled high against the fence posts. The skies are pale, metallic grey, like beaten pewter. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls once and then falls quiet again. You breathe in and murmur, "Spring is a rumour." That's what the old women used to say. Not quite a joke, not quite a lament. Just a truth softened into poetry. Because when winter drags past its welcome, and it always does, spring starts to feel like something you once dreamed rather than something that will come. You shuffle into your boots and wrap a blanket around your shoulders, stepping out to the porch. The snow crunches sharply beneath your feet. Each breath comes out in a cloud. But the cold is no longer the fierce, biting thing it was weeks ago. Now it's just familiar, like an overlong houseguest who's finally stopped rearranging your shelves and settled down to read quietly. You look around at the stillness and notice something unusual. Drips, tiny rivulets of water slipping off the eaves. The first true melt. You'd almost forgotten what that sounded like. The delicate tick of water meeting stone. It doesn't mean the end of winter. Not yet. But it means the season has blinked. Shifted. The darkness is not as deep, nor the mornings quite as cruel. Inside the longhouse, the hearth crackles gently. You sit beside it with a bowl of porridge and notice something else. Your hands aren't trembling from the cold anymore. Your nose isn't red. Your breath feels more like breath, less like smoke. It's subtle, but it's everything. This time of year is a strange limbo. The snow is still thick. The paths are still icy. But the body begins to expect more. To hope, cautiously. The calendar, such as it is, offers little comfort. No one has hung up a sheet with the word March printed on it. You don't count months by name, you count them by tasks. And right now, the only thing growing is the pile of antlers by the doorway, dropped by stags who passed silently in the night. You remember how your mother once told you that spring isn't announced. It's noticed. You notice it in the way the milk tastes different. In the longer stretches between logs on the fire. In the way the dog chooses to sleep near the door instead of under the table. You notice it in your bones, aching a little less when you stand. Still, it's not time to celebrate. The hard part isn't over. In some ways, this is the cruelest stretch, when food stores run lowest, when the novelty of snow has worn thin, when everyone's patience has worn thinner still. You pass the storeroom and count the remaining sacks. Not much barley left. The last of the dried meat is stiff as wood. Even the sky has begun to take on that sharpness that suggests it may soon try to escape the bowl. You scrape the side of the honey pot and mutter a prayer that bees are having pleasant dreams, somewhere underground. This is the hunger gap. When the winter has overstayed its welcome, but the spring garden has yet delivered its first green shoots. Historians still debate how severe these gaps were for Norse families. Some suggest communities traded or preserved more than enough to last. Others point to sagas that mention turnip dinners stretched with bark flour, which is exactly as appetizing as it sounds. You've tried it once. Never again. But you've also learned tricks. Everyone has. The bones left over from stew, boiled again, for broth. The crumb crusts from bread, fried in fat for a crisp. You don't waste anything in late winter. Even a half-rotten apple might be turned into a soft mash, then sweetened with herbs and called dessert. There's a kind of poetry in it. Everything you eat now has memory in it. That cheese, from the goat who gave birth in the storm. That dried fish, caught the day the river first froze. That bit of salt, traded for at great cost, saved for months. used now to season one final pot. Every bite says, "You made it this far. Keep going." And then, there are the rituals. On days like these, someone always lights a small candle in the window, just a stub of tallow, really, but symbolic. It says to the sun, "We're ready. Please return." Not because we're impatient, but because we've remembered how beautiful light is. There's also the egg ritual, silly as it may seem. A single egg, saved or bartered, is placed near the hearth on the day the chickens start laying again. Not to eat. Just to see. Just to believe in the coming of things. You find yourself talking more about green things lately. About nettles, dandelions, even weeds, anything edible, anything alive. And you start to plan. The garden. The fishing net repairs. The roof patches. The spring cleaning that everyone claims they won't do this year, and always does anyway. You're still wearing 4 layers. Still waking to ice in the basin. Still watching your breath fog the air. In Zayek. You've begun to thaw. And that, perhaps, is the most Viking thing of all, not just surviving winter, but letting hope take root even when everything around you is still frozen. You rise from your seat and open the shutter slightly, letting in a sliver of the grey, dripping sky. The light is dull. But it is light. You sit by the fire, stirring a small pot of barley with a carved wooden spoon, the rhythm slow and steady. Someone behind you is humming. Someone else is sharpening a knife against a stone. Outside, the wind has gone still, and even the goats seem reluctant to bleat. The world feels held, somehow. Suspended between seasons. Between hardship and relief. You take a deep breath and smile to yourself. Because even with a full belly and warm toes, you know the truth. You wouldn't last a day in this. No offense. It's not that you aren't brave. It's not that you don't appreciate a good woolen sock. It's just the Viking winter isn't gentle. It doesn't hold your hand or touch you. It expects things of you. It tests your patience, your thrift, your back, your ability to patch your only tunic with a fishbone needle and 0 complaints. You look around the longhouse, at the soot-black beams, at the hearth that has burned, faithfully, through every single night, at the bed boxes lined with fur and coughs and the occasional stolen chicken, at the woven baskets filled with wool, the hanging strings of dried herbs, the rack of snow-crusted boots by the door. This isn't a storybook. It's a sister. Every creak in the wood, every stitch in the cloak, every rot worn into the floor by pacing feet at survival. That's knowledge passed down not in books, but in muscle memory. People didn't thrive in this world because they were fierce. They did it because they were stubborn. Because they knew how to stretch summer into February. Because they learned not to curse the cold, but to use it to preserve food, harden tools, teach children patience and keep the lazy from sleeping in. Historians still argue whether Viking winters were as harsh as the sagas suggest or whether later storytellers added a layer of frost for drama. But your knees say yes. Your cracked knuckles say yes. And your frozen socks say a very loud yes. You add another pinch of salt to the barley and glance around the room. Your family is here. Alive. Humming. Breathing. You think of everything it took to get through the coldest months, sealing the shutters with moss and mud before the frost arrived, hauling wood through the dark, barefoot because your boots were drying, turning dried nettles into soup, and pretending it was delicious, mending the roof after a storm, one plank at a time, even when the wind made you weep, holding the baby through the fever, whispering songs into her hair while the blizzard howled outside, saying goodbye to the last turnip like it was a friend. This isn't just resilience. It's grace in discomfort. And yes, you'd struggle here. You, with your thermostat, and microwave and 3 kinds of shampoo. But that's okay. You're allowed to marvel, to respect, to sit by the fire and listen. Because what the Vikings teach you is not just how to survive winter, it's how to survive anything, by relying on one another, on layers, on laughter, on stew that has no name and burns your tongue but keeps you alive anyway. The fire pops now, sending up a ribbon of smoke. You add a twist of birch bark and lean back. Someone tells a joke. Someone else groans. The dog sneezes. Life continues. And you think to yourself, this, right here, is warmth. Not just the fire, but the closeness, the cleverness, the willingness to share one blanket between 5 people and call it a good night. You pour out bowls of barley, pass them around, eat slowly. No one speaks for a while. There's nothing urgent left to say. You've made it. Spring will come. And when it does, you'll laugh in the sunlight and dig in the mud and forget, briefly, how cold the world can be. But for now, you sit in the longhouse, full and safe, the cold at bay, and you truly know what it means to endure. The fire's faded to a soft red glow, pulsing gently like a heartbeat beneath ash. You lie curled beneath your blanket, the heavy wool pressing you into the straw bed like an embrace. Around you, the longhouse settles into sleepboards creaking softly, breath rising in rhythm, the faint flutter of a curtain caught in a sleepy draught. The storm has passed. The cold remains, but it lingers now like a memory rather than a threat. Outside, the snow is blue in the moonlight, untouched and quiet. The trees stand still. Even the animals are still, their shapes tucked into corners, their warmth mingling with yours through walls and floor and air. You exhale slowly. The air is cool, but your chest is warm. Tonight, you carry the weight of stories in your bones of flickering firelight and spun wool, of mead and moss, of rattling shutters and hands held close. You feel the strength of those who came before you, not in swords or shouts, but in blankets shared, bread divided, doors braced shut against the wind. You don't need to move. Not now. Not yet. Let the snow keep falling. Let the embers hum their quiet song. You are safe. You are warm. You are wrapped in something older than comfort belonging. So close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Let the fire dim. Let the long night pass, and the soft morning come, one flake at a time. And when it does, you'll rise again. But for now, just rest. Just rest.